Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Kristen Welker in Washington. The White House is facing major questions right now about what happens next, with the president giving mixed signals about potential military action against Iran over its lethal crackdown on protesters, while renewing his vow to annex Greenland. Starting with the latest on Iran, sources telling NBC News that the Pentagon today is presenting the president with options related to potential military action in Iran. It comes as the Pentagon is evacuating hundreds of troops from the U.S. base in Qatar ahead of any retaliation potentially from Iran in response if there is a U.S. action. President Trump has warned of very strong action if the Iranian regime proceeds with the execution of protesters. And according to the State Department earlier today, Iran was expected to carry out its first execution of a protester, a 26-year-old who was arrested near Tehran. But this afternoon from the Oval Office, the president claimed the killing in Iran had suddenly stopped.
We were told that the killing in Iran is stopping, and it's stopped, and it's stopping. And there's no plan for executions or executions. So I've been told that on good authority. We'll find out about it. I'm sure if it happens, we'll all be very upset. They told me that there'll be no executions, and so I hope that's true.
Does this mean military action is now off the table against Iran?
Well, we're going to watch and see what the process is, but we were given a very good statement by people that are aware of what's going on.
A U.S.-based human rights activist news agency estimating that more than 2,500 people have been killed in Iran amid the unrest, the vast majority of those deaths being protesters. That death toll also includes 12 people under the age of 18 and more than 100 people affiliated with the Iranian government or military. Now, we should note the Iranian government has not released its own figures when it comes to the death toll, and there is limited information coming out of Iran due to a nationwide internet blackout. That U.S.-based group compiles these estimates based on supporters in Iran cross-checking information and the data going through multiple internal checks. The government of Iran has blamed its foreign enemies for the unrest. Meanwhile, also at the White House today, Vice President J.D. Vance and Secretary of State Marco Rubio met with the foreign ministers of Denmark and Greenland after President Trump's statement on social media this morning that the U.S. needs Greenland for national security purposes, adding anything less than that would be, quote, unacceptable. The president also doubling down while speaking to reporters in the Oval Office this afternoon. Take a look.
Certainly, I'm not going to give up options, but it's very important. Greenland's very important for the national security, including of Denmark. And the problem is not a thing that Denmark can do about it if Russia or China wants to occupy Greenland. But there's everything we can do.
The foreign ministers calling the meeting with President Trump and Trump administration officials frank and constructive, but adding that fundamental differences remain.
For us, ideas that would not respect territorial integrity of the Kingdom of Denmark and the right of self-determination of the Greenlandic people are, of course, totally unacceptable. We agreed that it makes sense to try to sit down on a high level to explore whether there is possibilities to accommodate the concerns of the president, while we at the same time respect the red lines of the Kingdom of Denmark. So this is the work we will start. Whether that is doable, I don't know.
Now, Denmark also announcing today it is increasing its military presence in and around Greenland in coordination with NATO allies, citing security tensions in the Arctic region. Joining me now is NBC News senior White House correspondent Garrett Haake, NBC News chief foreign correspondent Richard Engel, and NBC News senior national security correspondent Courtney Kube, both on set with me right here. Garrett, let me start with you at the White House and these comments that we heard from President Trump about Iran saying that he believes the killing has stopped. What do you make of what we heard from the president?
Well, it's certainly a marked departure from the tone of the president over the last couple days. I'm thinking back to Friday when he said that if the Iranian regime started shooting, the U.S. would start shooting back. Yesterday, he posted a message to Iranian dissidents saying help is on the way. Today, he seems to accept a line from unnamed Iranian sources that the killing has stopped. As you laid out in the intro, Kristen, there's been significant killings, significant regime violence against its people in the last couple of days. And the Trump administration had staked out this kind of maximalist position that they would not back away from the Iranian dissidents here, that they would support protesters, and that they would act against the regime if there were violence against those protesters. Here you seem to hear the president say he's convinced that any violence against protesters has stopped. Now, we'll see if there's any evidence presented here, and I'll point out that he also didn't take military options off the table, but this did seem like a pretty marked reversal from the president.
Yeah, let me get reaction from Courtney and Richard here. Court, let me start with you. What are we watching today? We're anticipating another briefing for the president of potential options. What kind of options has he been given so far?
Yeah, so why today is a little bit more intense than maybe we have seen in recent days since the president's been talking about the possibility of any kind of action in Iran is because the president has now provided the Pentagon and the military with the military objectives that he's looking for in Iran. So not just saying we're going to act, we're going to support the protesters. He has told them this is what I want to accomplish out of some sort of action there. So the military always has these plans ready. They're able to tailor them based on what he wants, and that's what's being presented to him today. So we could really have a yes or no decision whether the president wants to move forward. And the range of options is still everything that we've been talking about all week, the possibility of what we kind of refer to as gray zone options, right? So short of kinetic or military strikes, all the way up to possibility for military strikes in Iran.
Richard, what do you make of this moment and what we heard from President Trump in the Oval Office? And of course, the death toll continues to climb in Iran. I mean, give us your reporting from the ground there.
So I'm still trying to digest this. He said this a short while ago, and it's very different. As of yesterday, President Trump looked like he was going to take some sort of military action. He said he was going to take military action. The State Department said, we're going to do something if the killings continue, and specifically referenced that 26-year-old activist, his family says, was scheduled to be executed today. Now President Trump's saying, well, we're going to wait and see what happens. He spoke with some Iranian officials who assured him that the killings have stopped. He's taking a pause. And you were just reporting yesterday that there were officials in the region, Arab officials, Israeli officials, who were concerned that the U.S. was going too fast into this. So I'm not sure that the military option is off the table, but maybe he's just pushing back the deadline a little bit, perhaps to get ready, perhaps to get the equipment in place, perhaps to come up with a more coordinated plan. But he's definitely seemed to be slowing things down today.
Courtney, he certainly did talk a little bit about what Richard was noting, which is that there were these Arab leaders who were encouraging the White House to pull back a little bit. What were you hearing about that?
Yeah, and Israeli officials. And it's not that they're saying don't take any military action at all, but they're more stressing that any military action needs to be more decisive when it happens. So if in fact the goal here is decapitation of the Iranian regime, decapitate Tehran, then it doesn't seem that the situation on the ground is ready for that at this point. And also, what the military has in the region isn't what it was back in June when the U.S. took the strikes against the nuclear facilities.
Close.
It's not even close. And that's not just for being able to support the military operations, but it's really critically for being able to defend against an Iranian response or retaliation.
Why is that significant that you're saying it's not even close?
Well, look at what just happened in Venezuela. And they're very different countries, but just look what was in place for Venezuela. There was aircraft carrier strike group, submarines, drones, many aircraft, buildup of thousands of troops in Puerto Rico, months and months of preparation to carry out this commando strike against a country that America knows, frankly, much better than Iran, is much closer, that America has more familiarity with culturally and otherwise. The U.S. has moved a lot of its assets out of the Middle East. After the Gaza peace agreement, a lot of the assets kind of left. So if you're going to send them back, that takes a little bit of time. And Iran has the capacity to attack tankers, has the capacity to attack American military bases, to attack Israel, to do cyber operations. So you pick a fight with a country that can fight back. You want to prepare for it at the very least. Certainly the military commanders who would be tasked with carrying it out would want time to prepare for it.
Well, just to follow up on that point, Richard, President Trump said that he wants to win. And everything that you're mapping out just explains how complicated it would be for the United States to have any type of decisive victory in this moment.
Well, you don't want to operate at the speed of emotion.
Right.
You want to have a plan in place. Now, it doesn't mean that the plan is off. People I'm speaking to at a variety of different levels think that there is still going to be some action taken. That the Iran is still in President Trump's crosshairs. So maybe this is just pushing it back. Maybe it's a diversionary tactic. There could be something tonight on a smaller scale. We really don't know. But this is President Trump sort of signaling to the world, to Iran, perhaps to others in the Middle East, Israel, Arab allies coming, that he doesn't plan to do a major regime change level operation tonight or in the next couple of days, perhaps.
Court, is that your sense, based on your reporting and based on what we heard from the president?
Yeah, the president's boxed himself in. He has said he's going to take some sort of action to support the protesters, whether it's today, whenever it happens. He's boxed himself into doing something. So now he's done this before, where he has said he's going to act on something and has not. The one thing that's fascinating watching President Trump when it comes to these sort of military actions is he loves to brag about the covert stuff too. So it is very possible that if they do move into this sort of gray zone territory, which generally is carried out by intelligence operatives or sometimes sort of the more elite military, if the president acknowledges that the U.S. has done it.
And the protesters are not in control of the streets right now in Iran in a way that they were a couple of days ago. The government is finding its feet a bit more. There are more pro-government activists on the street. There's still a lot of opposition, but they're happening more at night than they were just a couple of days ago.
Well, the images just showcase how incredibly tense the situation is on the ground there. Let me turn to Garrett and talk about another major focus at the White House today, another foreign policy focus. We know that top officials there met with officials from Greenland and Denmark. What came out of that meeting, Garrett? What were the key takeaways?
Well, the president says he is being briefed essentially right now on that meeting. What we heard from the Danish foreign minister at his news conference was that it was a, quote, frank but productive conversation. Kristen, as you know, that's sometimes Washington speak for something to just below a fist fight breaking out in a meeting, right? I mean, this is not the type of thing that gives you a lot of confidence that a lot of progress was made. The Danes came out and said they want to put together a high-level working group to continue to talk with the president about this. Another sort of common Washington stalling tactic for a problem without much of a solution. Here you have a situation in which the Danes say Greenland is not for sale. Greenlanders say we do not want to be sold or become part of the United States. And the president seems wholly unwilling to accept anything less than that, even in this Oval Office meeting just a short time ago, mocking Greenland and the Danes, saying they've upped their defense from 1 dog sled to 2. The great irony here is Greenland's defense against Russia and China is us. It's NATO. It's the alliance here, which a lot of outside analysts and, by the way, Republican politicians are warning the president he could break permanently by being too rash on Greenland.
Richard, what do you make of the developments today? And we have Denmark increasing their military presence around Greenland amidst this threat from the president to go in and take it, potentially by military force if necessary? So
NATO countries are absolutely livid, terrified, outraged. The list could go on and on of adjectives to use. They're looking at a situation where one NATO country potentially just steals a piece of land from another NATO country and says, and that would be the U.S. stealing from Denmark, and then says, yeah, and what are you going to do about it?
Right.
And they're not built for that. And European allies say, you do this, you're going to undercut NATO, you're going to destroy this military alliance, the greatest military alliance that has kept peace in the hemisphere since World War II, kept the Soviet Union at bay, is sort of trying to keep Russia from going beyond Ukraine. And they're saying publicly, this is all at risk. Don't do this. You want to protect Greenland? There's already American base there. You want to expand that American base? Go ahead. But why are you talking about occupying it, taking away, ripping it from another NATO ally? You're going to destroy the alliance.
Courtney, it is just extraordinary to hear the president say that he's not taking military action off the table. And as Richard maps out so clearly, the concern is that it would blow up NATO.
Yeah. And it's very possible that it would, by the way. I mean, I think that's very possible. So the real question is this all about President Trump putting pressure to ultimately get the gain of getting Greenland without military force? But look, we thought that was what was going to happen in Venezuela. We thought that his whole goal there was military pressure on the people around Maduro and on Maduro himself to ultimately get him to step down without the military stepping foot. And that's not what happened here. And we do know that there are discussions about diplomatic and even legal methods that they might be able to use to actually attain Greenland.
You know, this is not entirely new. The U.S. has expressed interest in controlling Greenland before. At the height of the Cold War, when it was the U.S. versus USSR, the U.S. wanted to put nuclear weapons in Greenland, but that was de-escalated. The ultimate solution was to leave this military base there, which serves to monitor missile defense. It looks up into space. It monitors satellites. All of that is happening right now. The difference is President Trump says, no, I want it. And you're going to give it to me, and you're going to give it to me, or I'm going to take it. And NATO just isn't built for that kind of threat.
And European allies trying desperately to find an offer. Garrett, final question to you. Based on your conversations at the White House, do you have a sense of the timeline that the president has in his head for potentially taking Greenland?
It's hard to say, Kristen. I mean, this is something he really started talking about early in the term. It went away for months. We didn't hear another word about it. I don't get the sense that there's imminence here. I mean, the fact that we're still discussing everything from a purchase to a referendum to military action suggests to me that we're not close. To borrow the military phrasing here, I think this is kind of like a political shaping operation, not anything close to actually pulling the trigger, if you will, on Greenland.
All right. Well, great conversation. Great start to the show. Garrett, Richard, and Courtney, thank you all so much. We really
great to be here all together.
Great to have you here, Richard. Coming up, we will turn to another foreign conflict as Republicans move to block a Senate effort to check the president's power in Venezuela after several of their members crossed the aisle to side with Democrats. Plus, new clashes and a major exodus of federal prosecutors in Minneapolis over the Trump administration's handling of its investigation into the fatal shooting of Renee Nicole Good by an immigration officer. We're on the ground with the very latest in Minneapolis. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. We turn now to another debate roiling Washington about the president's intervention abroad in Venezuela. Today on Capitol Hill, Republican Senate Majority Leader John Thune now saying that a vote on a much-anticipated war powers resolution may not happen. The resolution to limit President Trump's use of force in Venezuela advanced last week with the help of 5 Republicans. But now, one of those lawmakers, Senator Josh Hawley of Missouri, says he will join Republicans in trying to kill the measure, citing assurances from the administration there are no troops on the ground and that the White House would seek congressional authorization if that position changed. Leader Thune also suggested the resolution could be dismissed as not relevant because of the administration's assurances, though a motion to dismiss the resolution would also need a vote. Joining me now is Florida Republican Congresswoman María Elvira Salazar, a member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Thank you so much for being here.
Wonderful to be here with you.
Wonderful to have you here.
Sure.
Really appreciate it. Let's start off by talking about the very latest out of Venezuela. I had the opportunity to speak with President Trump last week about this. I asked him if there could be elections in 30 days. He said, absolutely not. That's way too soon. He later in another interview said, the United States could actually be there for several years. Are you comfortable with that timeline? Is that what you were anticipating?
Listen, I'm comfortable with the fact that the Americans are in Venezuela, the fact that they took out Maduro, and the fact that María Corina Machado is going to be meeting with the president tomorrow. She is the leader of the opposition. She earned it. She proved it. And we're delighted that she's going to have that face-to-face with the president. And I am sure that she's going to explain to him what she did, which we know very well.
Well, what are you hoping will come out of that meeting? There's been a lot of talk. Will she give her Nobel Peace Prize to President Trump? What do you think could potentially move the needle? Because obviously right now Delcy Rodriguez is in power. What do you think could be?
Well, María Corina was the one who was able to, against all odds, prove to the international community that they, the opposition, had won the elections 70-30. She was able to conjure up somehow this plan all over Venezuela and bring the tallies out so everyone could count and see that they indeed had won. She had been in a tunnel for 16 months, and we have been in communication with her, not only myself, but other members of Congress, where she has been telling us how the opposition is still strong inside Venezuela. So in other words, she is the leader, and she was there until she went to Oslo to pick up the Nobel Peace Prize, which she dedicated to President Trump. I am sure that she is going to just explain it to him, and he's an intelligent guy. He's going to understand who really has the votes in Venezuela.
Do you think, so it's fascinating what you're saying, you actually think tomorrow could change the way that President Trump views who should be running Venezuela?
Well, it's the empirical evidence. The empirical evidence is overwhelming, and she will definitely demonstrate it to him. And he gets it. He gets who the leaders are, who has the votes, and she does up until today. But I do believe that the United States sponsor free and fair elections with international observers. We'll be there to make sure that those elections are clean, and she may win again.
Do you think it was a mistake for the Trump administration? They took out Maduro, but they left Delcy Rodriguez and other Maduro allies effectively in power.
I think that's a great question. Is the art of the possible? Politics is the art of the possible. For 25 years, the Chavistas destroyed the country. Delcy was part of that plan. Remember, we got to remember that Delcy was the vice president of Maduro. Maduro was indicted in 2020. He was the head of the Suns cartel, along with Delcy and Diosdado Cabello and Padrino, who's the head of the military. We're talking about that they are the same gang. But we also know that the United States needs to keep stability, which is what Secretary Rubio said. Stability, restore, and transition. We, the United States, we're not in the business of occupying. We're in the business of liberating. And that's what I think is happening.
And just to push you on that point, you have been very supportive of Secretary Rubio's plan that he laid out that you just referenced. Part of it is for American oil companies to go in and to help rebuild the infrastructure of Venezuela's oil industry. A number of the oil executives were at the White House last week. They expressed skepticism. They said, look, there have to be real security guarantees before they can go back into Venezuela. What did you make of that meeting, and what is your level of optimism as we sit here and have this conversation that part of the plan is realistic?
Once again, the art of the possible. Those oil executives are in the private sector. They're not in charity. They need to go in and make sure that they're not going to be confiscated again, which I understand. But that's why we, the Americans, and that's why the opposition can definitely come together and say, okay, let's rebuild PDVSA, which is the oil industry, largest reserves of oil in the world. I always told María Corina, and I'm going to say it now publicly over the phone while she was hiding in the tunnel, once you make it back and Venezuela is a free country, make sure that the American companies are the ones who will be definitely taking over and helping you rebuild that country and that oil industry, because we do not want the Chinese buying once again 90% of the Venezuelan oil, because then China will use that power to invade Taiwan. No, we'll use that power to have dominance when it comes to AI. No, we want that to be in the hands of the Americans.
Let me ask you, because we started off the segment talking about the War Powers resolution. One key Republican in the Senate switching his vote, now no longer supporting the War Powers resolution. Do you think if there is more military action in Venezuela, significant military action, do you think the president would need to get authorization? I know you were opposed to it when it came through the House.
Yeah, but we know that there will be no need for any more military action.
You're that confident?
Of course, because Delcy and Padrino and Diosdado and all these people who stole the country for 25 years, I have info that they know that there is a new sheriff, and they're not going to be playing with the White House, because look what happened to Maduro. He's going to be spending the rest of his life with his wife, Celia, somewhere in an American jail. They don't want that destiny. So this is a new blueprint. This is like a new model that President Trump has created vis-a-vis Western Hemisphere, where now we will not need heavy military intervention, just those 3 minutes to take him out, and they will understand. So that's like I'm saying, Rubio is right. STR. Stabilize, SRT, recover and transition.
A couple more questions and we're almost out of time. I do
Sure.
have to ask you about Iran because there's been so much focus right now with President Trump signaling he's weighing potential military action against Iran amidst these protesters. Today seemed to walk that back a little bit. But would you support military action against Iran in this moment, Congresswoman?
I will support the same type of military action that happened in Venezuela. Look at the Iran, and you know this
More
is
complicated in Iran.
Indeed, because the Western Hemisphere cannot be compared to the Middle East. But look what's happening. The effect in Caracas was felt all the way in Tehran, where everyone wants the same thing: freedom, liberty, to be able to raise their kids. And the Iranians are claiming for the same thing. And I'm so happy the president is saying to the Ayatollahs, "Don't dare, don't dare." And, you know, I'm sure they read the memo.
Well, let me ask you finally about something domestically.
Yes.
Obviously, there's been a big debate over the way in which ICE has been deployed all across this country. And the backdrop to all of this is the debate over immigration.
Yes.
And the president was posting about this today. Are there any real conversations going on, Congressman? And I know you're engaged in this. Any bipartisan conversations that make you think, yes, immigration reform is possible?
Listen, I'm going to start with a lead. I'm sure that I'm sure that President Trump is going to be for immigration what Lincoln was for slavery and Reagan was for communism. He is a man that he comes from the private sector. He comes from construction and hospitality. Construction, hospitality, and agricultural are those three sectors, 15% of the economy that need those hands. I'm not blaming ICE. I'm blaming Congress that has not been able to write a law, and for the United States Congress and the President to sign an immigration reform. And that's why I introduced this legislation called the Dignity Act, which is not citizenship, is not amnesty, is dignity. Let's give dignity to those people who've been here for more than 5 years, do not have a criminal record, have been contributing to the economy, are needed in the labor force. We need to know who our neighbors are. So let's just clean this mess and write an immigration reform. And I just wrote dignity, and I would love to be able to come back and explain it to you, because that's the Solomonic in the middle. And that's what I think will solve the problem.
Okay, well, we're going to track it closely. We will have you back. Thank you for joining us, Congresswoman Salazar.
My pleasure to always be with you.
Thank you. Well, we really appreciate your being here. Coming up next, protests grow in Minnesota 1 week after the shooting of Renee Nicole Good, as half a dozen prosecutors in the state tell the Trump administration they're quitting. What's behind those mass resignations? Stay with us. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. Protests are escalating in Minnesota 1 week after an ICE officer shot and killed 37-year-old Renee Nicole Good in a Minneapolis neighborhood. Good's family announcing today they are now launching a civil investigation into her death. It comes as 6 federal prosecutors in the state resigned over the direction of the Justice Department's investigation into the shooting. A law enforcement source telling NBC News the attorneys felt pressure from Justice Department leadership to investigate any ties to activist groups by Good and her widow. Since Good's shooting, the federal government has surged hundreds of agents to Minneapolis. We've seen intensifying confrontations between officers and protesters, like this one, where ICE officers dragged a woman out of her car while she screams and tells officers she's disabled and trying to get to a doctor's appointment. So this was just a resident saying she's trying to get to a doctor's appointment. Telling Newsweek, the woman was arrested for ignoring multiple commands by officers to move her car. Joining me now is NBC News correspondent Shaquille Brewster in Minneapolis and NBC News senior Homeland Security correspondent Julia Ainsley. Thanks to both of you for being here. Shaq, let me start with you there on the ground. It seems like the anger is growing in the streets of Minneapolis. Take us through what you've been witnessing and also what people have been telling you.
Yeah, it's a really interesting contrast because, yes, on one hand, the anger is growing. You see that in the flashes. You saw that overnight when protesters went downtown and were marching at hotels that they believed ICE agents were sleeping. But then you have the 1 week the 1 week mark of when Renee Nicole Good was killed at this site. And at this site earlier today, you had 3 hours of prayers, a prayer vigil led by local prayer and faith leaders to kind of have that more solemn commemoration. And that's the mix that you're having. We have that statement from the family where they call her a bright light, but then you have the frustration in this community because the immigration operation that she was resisting or that she was responding to when she was killed is still very much underway. ICE and DHS saying that they have now conducted more than 2,400 arrests in the Minnesota and Minneapolis area. That is causing a lot of frustration. You have ICE observers that come out and blow their whistles whenever they see one of those arrests and those clashes that are only continuing. So yes, the anger is definitely growing, Kristen, but you're seeing at scenes like this, there's definitely still that pain in the mourning, especially 1 week since her death.
And Shaq, we know that her family is now saying that they're opening a civil investigation into her killing. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, they're saying they're definitely investigating and are floating the idea of that civil lawsuit. And they acknowledge that there's some hurdles here, especially with it being a federal case against federal officers. They acknowledge that it's a higher bar that's needed, that it would be a case that would be before a judge rather than a jury. So despite the complexities, despite the difficulties in bringing a case, they say that they are not going to hesitate to pursue what they're calling justice for Renee Good and for her family. So that is something that we're going to watch in the days and weeks and really months to come.
All right, Shaq Brewster, thank you so much. And we're getting a little bit of an update from DHS on the officer involved in the shooting. Julia, what more can you tell us? What is this update?
That's right. So what we understand now from DHS is that Jonathan Ross, the officer who fatally shot Renee Nicole Good, was treated at the hospital, and that the doctors there said that he had some internal bleeding to the torso. This is after we heard that he was taken to the hospital to be treated for injuries, but it was surprising to people who saw him walking around at the end of that video seemingly uninjured, wondering what had happened. And of course, the investigation will probably point to this, as they say that her car did come close enough to be able to cause that injury, but of course, we don't know the specifics so far.
Yeah, and it all comes as there have been multiple resignations of federal prosecutors. What can you tell us, and how is that adding to the puzzle pieces of all of this?
Well, we know of 6 so far. These are career prosecutors in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Minnesota who have now stepped down entirely from their positions because they didn't like the way that the FBI investigation, which they were a part of as part of the Justice Department, was going into the death. That they didn't think that they should be interviewing or focusing on Good's partner. There's been an investigation into her and her background, and that instead that they should be focusing on the circumstances of the shooting itself. What led to it? Was it a violation of her civil rights? But as we've heard from Todd Blanche at the Justice Department, he says that he concluded that there should be no criminal investigation, civil rights investigation into whether or not this officer criminally violated Good's civil rights.
And let's get back to the protesters. We have seen some arrests. What is the scope in there?
Well, of course, there have been a number of arrests of protesters, but that also comes at the same time that they've arrested over 2,400 immigrants as part of this. We've seen a lot of videos that we actually haven't gotten as much response from DHS as we'd like, asking what exactly is happening in each circumstance. There's a viral video of them pushing a protester really into traffic. There's a bus that comes to a sudden stop. There's another one of a vehicle being rammed that we haven't gotten a response about what happened there. A lot of use of tear gas. And as we see more protests like the one Shaq's been covering overnight, there has been an increase in the arrest of the protesters there as well.
And just, Julia, quickly, what are you watching for as we move forward with this?
I think it's a question of how much the administration wants to keep hammering on Minneapolis. These very prosecutors who stepped down were leading the charge on fraud. That's the reason ICE came there in the first place. That's the reason President Trump focused on the state of Minnesota. But there seems to be really walking up to the line where Minnesota may cry uncle. We've seen that from what Secretary Noem and others have said about what they're doing in Minnesota, because they so want the cooperation of state police in their immigration enforcement.
All right, Julia Ainsley covering all of the angles for us. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Well, we'll dive deeper into the political fallout over ICE's tactics. Plus, another sitting Democratic senator says she's under investigation by the Trump Justice Department. The panel is next. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. Let's get right to the panel. Mariana Sotomayor, congressional reporter for The Washington Post. Chuck Rocha, former senior advisor for Bernie Sanders' presidential campaign and now host of the Substack show, The Rocha Revolution, co-host of the Latino Vote podcast. And Charlie Dent, former Republican congressman from Pennsylvania and now executive director of the Aspen Institute Congressional Program. Thanks to all of you for being here. Mariana, I have to start with you. Minneapolis continues to be a hotbed. Protests, clashes with ICE officers. Where do you see this going? What have you been watching for?
I mean, hopefully it doesn't continue to be a tinderbox and see another example of what we saw last week. You know, what I'm watching on Capitol Hill is that we have seen Democrats for the past year, honestly longer, saying we don't want to talk about defunding ICE. We don't want to talk about, you know, defunding the police. And while they're not saying that, there is just so much frustration. And I think that this is going to play out not just politically, but also in the halls of Congress. We have a government funding deadline, and there are many Democrats already saying, well, we're not going to give any of our votes unless we see some kinds of reforms. And Republicans, of course, you know, this has become such a politically divisive issue, but privately there are many who don't want to continue to see this happening.
Yeah, talk a little bit, Congressman Dent, about that, about the fact that there are Republicans privately who are saying this is not what we want. This is not what we should be focused on, particularly heading into the midterms, and obviously the tragedy of what happened.
Yeah, I think most Republicans do want the Homeland Security Department through ICE to go about interior enforcement, but they don't like the way this is being done or how it's being done or even the types of people who are being targeted. That's the problem. There's always been a need. For greater interior enforcement. But this is beyond what anybody had expected. And of course, now everybody's concerned too, because all these investigators all these prosecutors are stepping out, resigned, and that calls into question what type of investigation there will be, and will there be public confidence in that investigation?
Yeah.
The problem is the president wants to be talking about immigration. He wants to be talking about border security. The problem is what we're seeing with as we head into the midterms, to the congressman's point, is that if you ask somebody in polling right now, they'll all say that we should have a secure border. Anybody comes to our country and breaks the laws, they should be deported. What they don't want is what they're seeing on their TV screens, and that's the conflict between the Republican Congress and this White House. The White House is firmly footed on wanting to talk about this issue, but the Congress is scared of it.
Is there enough time to resolve that dichotomy before the midterms, before people start making their minds up about who they're going to vote for?
Well, they have to figure it out not only before the midterms, but before this funding deadline.
Right.
The Homeland Security Appropriations Bill has to be done by January 30th, and I'm sure that people are going to have amendments on that bill to say no masks. You know, they're going to say, boy, they get all sorts of issues that they're going to put in to condition any funding for ICE.
Chuck, on that point, do you think it would be a mistake for Democrats to try to hold up government funding over this issue, funding DHS? Because it is a real debate, as Mariana laid out.
Mariana will tell you that this cuts both ways. And before she says that, I'll say that there's not a winner or a loser when it comes to shutting down the government. In this particular case, the base, though, the turnout for the 2026 election is much different than the presidential. It's the base of both parties. And the base of the party for the Democrats is hungry for a fight and for folks to stand up to this president.
All right. Well, we heard from Joe Rogan on this, and I'm going to play it and get your reaction on the other side. Take a look.
I can also see the point of view of the people that say, yeah, but you don't want militarized people in the streets just roaming around, snatching people up, many of which turn out to actually be U.S. citizens that just don't have their papers on them. Are we really going to be the Gestapo? Where's your papers? Is that what we've come to? So it's more complicated than I think people want to admit.
Mariana, do you think the White House listens when he speaks?
On an issue like this, I don't think so. Just because it is contradictory to what the perspective is of the White House right now. I mean, Trump hasn't really said, okay, ICE agents, calm down. These images are bad. He's at some points been sympathetic to what happened last week, but there is no directive. And frankly, Kristi Noem, who is the Homeland Security Secretary, I mean, she's saying, you know, what the actions that ICE are taking are the right ones. You Americans need to follow the law. Don't get in their face. So I don't really think, I mean, unless there's some polling, unless things change, I think there is a difference between potentially seeing more congressional Republicans speaking out about this, but I just don't see the White House or the administration necessarily taking that stance
I think
yet.
the American public has a much more nuanced view on this issue than the politicians give them credit for. I mean, most Americans aren't reacting saying, oh, that this woman was a terrorist, this poor woman who's died. And the others are saying, you know, this cop isn't necessarily a murderer. And so there's nuance. But that's not what you're hearing from each side. They're all very angry, and they just don't, frankly, the politicians need to talk a lot less and then conduct serious investigations before they run their mouths.
Yeah, well, and this is all coming against the backdrop of the midterm elections. I want to talk a little bit about the midterm. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, Mariana, named North Carolina, Maine, Ohio, and Alaska as 4 states Democrats, quote, have a real good chance of winning and flipping. Do you think that's realistic?
I mean,
it's ambitious.
It is incredibly ambitious. Listen, when you are in the minority, what is the minority leader going to say? Oh my gosh, these are our pathways, these are our chances to get there. They have done a good job with recruitment. That is step number 1. I think that has given, especially Senate Democrats, a lot of confidence, especially the move that we saw with Peltola entering the Alaska race. We have Sherrod Brown in Ohio. They are no names in their states, but by no means is this going to be a gliding, easy path to the majority in
Chuck,
the Senate.
You're eager to jump into this.
On average, in this last election we just had in November in New Jersey and Virginia, and if you take all the averages of the special elections, there's been an overperformance of almost 15 points on average. Some of those were much more. And if you got half of that, you would win all of these Senate seats. And a hat tip again to your point, Mariana, to Chuck Schumer. Excellent recruiting. Like, if there's a chance to win in Ohio, it's with Sherrod Brown. And he still has an uphill battle, but at least there's a chance, or there'd be no chance. Roy Cooper in North Carolina, the former governor, was an ace recruit. Like, these are the kind of people, if there's a slim chance to do this, it's with these great recruits.
Congressman, do you think that Republicans are nervous about the Senate? And do you think part of their consternation is because they're all of these other issues that are kind of at the forefront right now, and not the economy, which is what folks like Susie Wiles want the president to be talking about, and really think should be the key focus?
Well, I do think Republicans in the Senate are nervous. I tend to think that Alaska is a real stretch for the Democrats, and I would even argue Ohio's probably a stretch, but they will be more competitive than they ought to be. And certainly North Carolina and Maine are extremely competitive.
Brown's won before. You don't think he can win again?
He could. He could. But I don't think it's probable at this point. Things can change. They can change. But today, I wouldn't say so. But we just don't know. There's a lot happening here in this map. It's a tough grind. The House is a lot easier.
And that's right. And every dollar that the Republicans spend in one of those seats is a dollar they're not spending in another place where they probably have a better shot.
Yeah. Mariana, let me ask you, because among the topics that the White House and the administration has been focused on, obviously these foreign entanglements. We've spent the hour talking about them in Iran, as well as Greenland. And then what some would call the retribution campaign. Senator Alyssa Slotkin saying federal prosecutors are investigating her after she and fellow congressional Democrats took part in a video encouraging service members to defy orders. I want to play a little bit of what she said.
To be clear, this is the president's playbook. Truth doesn't matter, facts don't matter, and anyone who disagrees with him becomes an enemy, and he then weaponizes the federal government against them. It's legal intimidation and physical intimidation meant to get you to shut up. He's used it with our universities, our corporations, our legal community, and with politicians who falsely believe that doing his bidding and staying quiet will keep them safe.
Mariana, how is this playing out? And obviously we see Senator Mark Kelly having a huge battle as well.
Yeah, I don't think Democrats are actually nervous. It is a warning shot, though, to especially Republicans. We've seen how Trump is trying to intimidate a number of Republicans who've been voting against him, calling them up. They are listening to him. I think Democrats, if anything, it has somewhat emboldened them. And I think she's right. Like, it is intimidation. To what extent has it stopped Democrats from doing something going public? I haven't heard of that yet.
All right, guys. Well, great conversation. Thank you all for being here, Mariana, Chuck, and Charlie. Really appreciate it. Coming up after the break, the president's special envoy says the next phase of his peace plan in Gaza is underway and proceeding towards full disarmament. That's next on Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. Turning now to Gaza, where President Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, is declaring phase 2 of the president's 20-point plan to end the war between Israel and Hamas has begun. Even as outstanding questions about the ceasefire and whether the terms of the first phase have been met. NBC international correspondent Matt Bradley has more on the region's next steps.
Well, that news we heard from Steve Witkoff, President Trump's special envoy, was anticipated, saying that the ceasefire was moving from phase 1 of the deal to phase 2. Now, this was supposed to happen quite a long time ago, but there were delays in returning the deceased hostages inside the Gaza Strip. There's still one remaining, that of the body of a young police officer who was killed on October 7th. His body is still in the Gaza Strip. That is the last outstanding hostage that still remains in Gaza. The Israelis have withdrawn to the so-called yellow line inside the Gaza Strip, and even though the Israelis are continuing to attack Hamas targets inside the yellow line, this ceasefire has largely held, and President Trump has been pressuring all of the sides to move on to phase 2, even though there still is that body remaining. But a lot of terms about phase 2 have still not yet fully been decided. One more clue we got tonight, and that was an announcement from mediators saying that Ali Shat, who's a former deputy minister in the Palestinian Authority, which governs the West Bank and has not governed the Gaza Strip for much of the last 20 years, that this man will now be leading the Palestinian administrative body that will run day-to-day affairs inside the Gaza Strip, and presumably will be reporting to the so-called Board of Peace that President Trump himself will lead. This was all in that 20-point peace plan that President Trump unveiled and that was signed in Egypt. So whether or not we actually see a move toward the next phase, that's uncertain. In many ways, the announcement that we heard today was more symbolic than anything else, because the terms around phase 2 haven't really been determined.
Well, our thanks to Matt Bradley for that report. We will be back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now. The news continues straight ahead.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.